There is a photograph from November 1973 that 500 million people watched being made in real time. A young woman in a high-necked Tudor-style gown, walking through Westminster Abbey toward a man in military dress, her expression composed to the point of being unreadable. She was 23 years old, the only daughter of the Queen of England, and she looked exactly the way a princess was supposed to look on her wedding day. The Abbey had 2,000 guests inside it, and thousands more lining the streets to catch a glimpse of the procession. It was declared a national bank holiday. The world watched on color television for the first time in a British royal wedding. What the cameras could not see was what would take the next 19 years to become fully visible. He was pleasant, he was handsome, he was good on a horse. And according to his brother-in-law, Prince Charles, he was also thick and wet, a man whose defining quality was the absence of quality, a fog in human form. What happened between that wedding day and the April morning in 1992, when a London judge dissolved the marriage in less than 5 minutes, is a story about a woman who knew what she was dealing with and kept going anyway, about infidelity confirmed by a New Zealand DNA test, about love letters stolen from a briefcase, about 4 people shot on the Mall in central London on a quiet March evening, and about how the hardest working royal in Britain spent 18 years married to a man whose primary emotional range, by most accounts, is extended from indifferent to unavailable. This is that story. All of it, every part, the cameras missed. The girl who grew up in the eye of history. Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise was born on August 15, 1950, at Clarence House in London, the second child and only daughter of Princess Elizabeth and Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. A 21-gun salute was fired in Hyde Park to mark the occasion. She was baptized a month later in the music room at Buckingham Palace by the Archbishop of York. She arrived into a world that was already watching, though she was not yet old enough to know it. Her mother became queen on February 6, 1952, when Anne was 18 months old. Her father was Elizabeth's consort, a man of fierce intelligence and direct manner, who applied both to the raising of his children without significant softening. Her older brother Charles, born just 21 months before her, was the heir. She was the spare, and further back still, in the sense that the rules of succession at the time meant a subsequent male birth would push her further down the line. She was not precious in the institutional sense that Charles was precious. She was the second child and only daughter, which gave her a specific kind of latitude. What this meant practically was that Anne grew up with very little of the particular pressure that fell on Charles, and a great deal of freedom to be herself that she used with both hands from a young age. She was not interested in tiaras or in the delicate business of performing femininity for public consumption. She was interested in horses. This was not a passing enthusiasm born of proximity to a family that kept horses at every estate. It was a devotion that shaped her entire life from the time she could sit in a saddle, which was very early indeed. She rode with a seriousness that other children reserved for other things. Her father, Prince Philip, once remarked about his horse-obsessed daughter that if it did not fart or eat hay, she had no interest in it. This was not entirely accurate, but it captured something true. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. She attended Bendon School in Kent from 1963, living as a boarder until 1968. The palace, understanding that a princess needed some form of social interaction with young women who were not courtiers or staff, had created a temporary Girl Guides company when Anne was small, its sole purpose being to allow her to interact with children who were not part of the royal household. When she went away to boarding school, the Girl Guides company disbanded. Its work was done. She left Benenden with 6 O-levels and 2 A-levels, not the academic credentials of someone destined for university, but the credentials of someone who had other plans for her energy. She was not academic in the way Charles was academic. She was physical, practical, direct. She said what she meant, and she meant what she said, which by the standards of the institution she was born into was something close to radical. She did not cultivate the performance of emotional display. She did not seek the approval of strangers. She was not cold exactly. The people who knew her well, who got inside the perimeter of her reserve, described something else entirely. A genuine warmth that operated at close range and went nowhere near a press conference. A sharp wit that could make a room laugh when she chose to deploy it. A loyalty to the people she valued that was total and durable. But the public face, the face the press encountered when they pointed cameras at her during royal engagements and overseas tours, was formidable. She had no interest in being liked by people who had no claim on her. She had no interest in manufacturing a warmth she did not feel for an occasion she had not chosen. This made the tabloids nervous and made the public, over time, admire her in a way they admitted somewhat reluctantly, because admiring someone so pointedly disinterested in your admiration requires a certain intellectual honesty. What Anne had, and this is documented repeatedly by people who covered her, by officials who worked alongside her, by protection officers who spent years in her company, was the quality of showing up completely. She became one of the hardest working members of the royal family, in a family not known for idleness, completing more than 500 official engagements a year during her peak years. She cared about the work, not the ceremonial aspects of royal work, the ribbon cutting and the receiving lines, and the formulaic exchanges with local dignitaries. She cared about the substance. She cared about what the organizations she supported were actually doing, and whether they were doing it well. A royal protection officer who worked with her for years described her as a gem and one of the nicest and most hard-working royals he had encountered, and he had encountered several. The observation was not unusual. It was consistent across a broad range of people with no particular reason to agree with each other. Her equestrian career reflected the same commitment. She became a genuinely competitive international-level rider in the discipline of three-day eventing, which combines the precision of dressage, the technical challenge of cross-country riding over demanding terrain, and the athleticism of show jumping. She won the individual European Eventing Championship in 1971 at the age of 21 on a horse called Doublet. She won 2 silver medals at the 1975 European Eventing Championships. In 1976, she competed in the Olympic Games in Montreal, becoming the first member of the British royal family to do so. She did not medal in Montreal, her horse Goodwill falling on the cross-country course, but she had competed legitimately and at the highest level. The IOC member doping control officials, who were required to check all competitors, had famously been uncertain whether to apply the standard protocol to a princess. They proceeded with the standard protocol. She apparently found this reasonable. All of which makes what happened in the early 1970s both more explicable and more poignant. Because Anne was not a romantic in the conventional sense. She was not looking for a grand love story or the kind of partnership that would be discussed in decades of biographies. She was looking for someone who shared her world, and the world she lived in was almost entirely made of horses. The man she found was made of much the same material. Mark Phillips and the making of a champion. Mark Anthony Peter Phillips was born on September 22, 1948, in Tetbury, Gloucestershire, a town in the English countryside 20 miles south of Cheltenham. He was in most respects exactly what his background suggested. A boy from a military family in rural England who loved horses and became very good at riding them. His father was Major Peter William Garside Phillips, a man who served in the British Army and earned a military cross. His mother, Anne Patricia née Tiarks, was educated at Down House School and had served in the Women's Royal Naval Service during the Second World War. Her father, John Gerhard Edward Tarks, had served in both World War I and World War II, risen to the rank of brigadier, and served as aide-de-camp to King George VI from 1947-1950, representing the monarch formally at various state occasions. It was not a family that struggled, or a family that questioned things much. They were the kind of English family that had been doing the same things in the same way for generations, and regarded this continuity as its own form of success. The military ran through the men. The horses ran through all of them. Mark attended Stouts Hill Preparatory School near Ewley in Gloucestershire, then Marlborough College. Then the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the institution that has been producing British Army officers for more than 2 centuries. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant into the 1st the Queen's Dragoon Guards in July 1969, on passing out from Sandhurst, promoted to lieutenant in January 1971, and was serving as an acting captain by the time he married in November 1973. He was promoted substantively to captain in July 1975 and retired from the Army on March 30, 1978. He was permitted, as cavalry captains traditionally are, when their civilian occupation involves working with to continue styling himself Captain Mark Phillips in retirement. His military career was competent rather than distinguished, which was fine because the military was not the point. The point was horses. He had begun his eventing career in the Beaufort Hunt Pony Club, where he rode under the Olympic gold medalist Colonel Frank Weldon, and his talent was clear from early on. He was a reserve member of the British equestrian team for the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. He did not compete in Mexico, but he was there, part of the team's structure, beginning to understand what it meant to operate at international level. In 1970, he was part of the British 3-day event team that won the world title. In 1971, they won the European title. In 1972, at the Munich Olympics, the British team won gold. Individually, Phillips finished in 35th place in Munich, which was not the story, but the gold medal was. He also won badminton, the most prestigious event, British eventing, 4 times. In 1971 and 1972 on a horse called Great Ovation, in 1974 on Columbus, and in 1981 on Lincoln. He would later win a silver medal with the British team at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, though he never competed individually because his horse sustained a pulled muscle and could not complete the 3-day event. These were real achievements in a genuine sport. 3-day eventing demands athleticism, technical skill, physical courage, and an intricate partnership with an animal that cannot be directed by words. It requires the kind of application that goes beyond natural talent. Phillips had both the talent and the application, and the record of wins at badminton and the medal table at the Olympics confirmed what people in the equestrian world had been saying about him for years. He was tall, good-looking in a clean-cut military way, quiet in social settings, and entirely at ease in a stable. He had a pleasant manner when he chose to deploy it. He was not a man of wide intellectual curiosity, or at least there is no available evidence that he was. He was not a man with strong opinions about things outside his immediate domain, which was horses and the land, and the physical world of outdoor competition. He was not, to borrow the phrase Prince Charles would later deploy with some precision, a man who generated much heat or light in a room. What he did generate was competence. Within the narrow world of 3-day eventing, he was authoritative, respected, and knowledgeable. His technical understanding of cross-country course design would eventually make him one of the most sought-after course designers in the international circuit. He coached the United States eventing team for nearly 2 decades after leaving his marriage. He knew horses. He understood the sport at a level that few people anywhere matched. The problem, as the next 18 years would demonstrate, was that a marriage is not a cross-country course. You cannot design your way through it. And the techniques of 3-day eventing are not transferable to the management of an interior life or a partnership with another human being. Prince Charles's nickname for him was Foggy, on the grounds that he was thick and wet. This was not an observation Charles kept to himself. The meeting, the courtship, and the complications underneath. The equestrian world of early 1970s, Britain was small enough that Anne and Mark had encountered each other on the circuit before their relationship became something more specific. Show jumping and eventing were the shared language of a particular stratum of English life that combined military families with country estates and competitive ambition, and both of them moved through this world with comfort and ease. The specific meeting that mattered happened during the 1971 European Eventing Championships. Phillips was part of the winning British team. Anne competed individually and won the gold medal, becoming the individual European champion at 21 years old. She was also that year voted BBC Sports Personality of the Year, making her the first and at the time only princess to receive that recognition. They were in the same place, doing the same thing, and doing it at the same level. This was a genuine coincidence of world. There was something appealing to Anne, the evidence suggests, about a man who occupied the equestrian world on his own merits, rather than by proximity to hers. Mark Phillips had his Olympic gold medal before he married a princess. He had his badminton wins before the marriage gave him any platform. He was not riding on her reputation or building a career on her name. He was a legitimate presence in the world they shared. Before Phillips entered the picture seriously, Anne had been involved with someone whose emotional complexity was considerably greater than anything she would encounter with the man she eventually married. Andrew Parker Bowles was a cavalry officer from a family with royal connections, charming, ambitious, Catholic, and in various ways exactly the kind of man that the institution Anne belonged to would find impossible to accommodate. Their romance was widely believed to have begun during Ascot Week in June 1970. The Parker Bowles family's connection to the royal household ran through Andrew's parents' friendship with the Queen Mother. Andrew had reportedly served as a page at the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth. The romance had a depth and intensity that the equestrian circuit observed, and that its participants, decades later, confirmed in various ways. The insurmountable obstacle was religion. Andrew Parker Bowles was a Catholic. Anne, as the Queen's daughter, stood in the line of succession, and in the event of becoming sovereign, she would become the head of the Church of England. Marriage to a Catholic was not a private matter of personal faith. It was an institutional impossibility that had no workable resolution. Both of them eventually understood this, though the understanding apparently cost something on both sides. What makes the timing almost unbearably pointed is that in 1973, both parties moved on simultaneously. Andrew Parker Bowles married Camilla Shand on July 4, 1973, in a Catholic ceremony at the Guards Chapel in London. The Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, and Princess Anne were all at the reception in St. James's Palace. Anne, in attending the wedding of the man she had wanted to marry and could not, performed the kind of composure that the institution demanded and received no credit for. Later that same year, on November 14th, Anne married Mark Phillips at Westminster Abbey. Whether the sequence was coincidence or something more deliberate on both sides is not resolvable from the public record. What is clear is that Anne arrived at her wedding, having navigated the end of a more complicated attachment and having settled on a man who, whatever his limitations, would not present the institutional obstacles that Parker Bowles had. Mark Phillips was Protestant, unencumbered by the complexity of conversion or confession, and willing to let her define the terms of a life that was primarily shaped by her public role. The engagement was announced on May 29, 1973. The wedding was set for that autumn. Before the formal announcement, the palace had been managing the usual speculation about whether a relationship existed and what its future might be. Anne's response to a reporter's question about whether she was in love, delivered in the spring of 1973, was characteristically direct. She said yes. She said it in a way that made clear the conversation was over. The ceremony that stopped a country. November 14, 1973 was Prince Charles's 25th birthday. His sister's wedding was a somewhat unexpected way to mark the occasion. He stood in Westminster Abbey as his best man's duties began and watched 2,000 guests and 500 million television viewers watch the bride walk in. The day had been declared a special national bank holiday. The procession from Buckingham Palace to the Abbey used the glass coach for Anne and her father, with 3 state coaches accompanying the wedding party. The crowds lining the streets were enormous. London had not seen of a royal wedding in some years, and the nation's appetite for spectacle, combined with the technical novelty of color television broadcasting, produced one of the most watched events in British broadcasting history. Anne's dress was designed by Maureen Baker, the chief designer for Susan Small, a ready-to-wear label Baker had previously used to design clothes for the princess. The gown had a high neck, wide medieval sleeves, and a Tudor silhouette that took its cues from a different period of English royal history than the romantic post-Victorian confections that later defined the image of royal weddings. The train was embroidered by Locke's Embroiderers, a company of long royal connection, using designs that complemented the overall medieval register. A statue of a female jockey jumping a fence sat on top of the wedding cake, in a nod to both parties' primary passion. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Michael Ramsay, officiated. The service was Anglican and traditional in its structure. Anne wore Queen Mary's fringed tiara, a royal heirloom. Her bouquet included myrtle, a tradition dating back to Queen Victoria. She carried it with the combination of ceremony and matter-of-factness that she brought to most things. Phillips declined a peerage from the Queen, or the question was never formally raised, or both things were partially true, and neither party was prepared to specify. The official record contains ambiguity on this point. What is clear is that the husband of the Queen's only daughter was going to remain plain Captain Mark Phillips, a captain in retirement from the Queen's Dragoon Guards, and a competitive equestrian, without any modification to his name or rank beyond the one he already possessed. His children, when they came, would not bear royal titles either. This was consistent with the approach. Be married to the princess, be present in the royal world as necessary, but maintain a certain apartness from its most visible apparatus. After the ceremony and the balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace, the couple honeymooned before settling into Gatcombe Park, a 700-acre estate in Gloucestershire near Minchinhampton, that the Queen had purchased as a wedding gift for them, at a reported cost of several £100,000. It was exactly the right environment for both of them. Horsey countryside, private, rural, at a comfortable distance from London and its press corps, with stabling and land and the kind of practical daily life that both preferred to ceremony and performance. What neither of them advertised was the thing that was going to matter. 4 months after the wedding, on a quiet March evening in London, it was going to become briefly and then permanently apparent that when an armed man with genuinely bad intentions appeared in close proximity to Princess Anne, the response of the person most responsible for her safety in that car was going to be Anne herself. The kidnapping attempt, March 20, 1974, around 8 in the evening. Anne and Mark were being driven back to Buckingham Palace along the Mall after attending a charity film screening. They were in a maroon Austin Princess Vanden Plas limousine bearing royal insignia. Anne's lady-in-waiting, Rowena Brassey, sat across from the couple in the back. Inspector James Beaton, a member of SO-14, the Royalty Protection Command, was in the front passenger seat. The chauffeur, Alex Callender, was driving. The Mall is not a particularly dark road, but it was not particularly well lit in 1974. As the car moved along toward the palace, a white Ford Escort overtook them and stopped, blocking the road. The chauffeur stopped. Beaton got out. The man who emerged from the Ford Escort was named Ian Ball. He was 26 years old, unemployed, and suffering from serious mental illness that would later be diagnosed as schizophrenia. He had been planning this for at least 2 years. He had prepared a ransom demand of £2 million addressed to the Queen, intended to be paid for Anne's safe return. He had rented a house 5 miles from Sandhurst, where Anne and Mark had been living since their marriage. He had studied the route. He had chosen his moment. He had also bought himself a revolver. Beaton stepped forward to intervene, and Ball shot him in the shoulder. Beaton managed to return fire and missed, his injuries affecting his aim. His gun then jammed. He attempted to physically intervene despite his wounds and was shot again, then a third time. 3 bullets. He fell. Ball came around to the side of the limousine where Anne was sitting and opened the door. He told her to get out. Anne had been watching everything that had just happened. She had seen her protection officer shot. She had watched the gun jam and heard the shots and understood the situation with a precision that the chaos around her did not reduce. She also understood something about Ball that proved crucial. He was nervous. His nervousness was an asset if she handled the next several minutes correctly. She described her approach. In a later interview with Michael Parkinson, she said she had been scrupulously polite. She thought it was silly to be too rude at that stage. What she said to Ball, in its most compressed form, when he demanded she leave the car, was, "Not bloody likely." This became the sentence that went around the world. It was, in its way, a perfectly calibrated response, dismissive enough to unsettle, direct enough to be unambiguous, measured enough to avoid provoking an immediate violent reaction. While Ball stood at the open door, uncertain how to proceed in the face of a princess who was not cooperating with his plan, Ronnie Russell arrived. Russell was a former amateur boxer who had been walking past and initially assumed he was witnessing a road rage incident. He went over to investigate and observed an armed man attempting to drag a woman from a limousine, whereupon he punched Ball in the head. This gave Anne and her lady-in-waiting the moment they needed to exit from the other side of the car. A detective constable named Peter Edmonds, who had heard the radio call from the scene and arrived in his own vehicle, chased Ball when he fled on foot through St. James's Park. Edmonds threw his coat over Ball's head, tackled him, and made the arrest. 4 people had been wounded. Beaton, who took 3 bullets and was later awarded the George Cross for his actions. The chauffeur, a passing journalist named Brian McConnell, who had tried to intervene and was shot, and a police officer named Michael Hills, who arrived during the incident. Nobody died. Ball was charged with attempted kidnapping and attempted murder. He pleaded guilty to the relevant charges and was detained indefinitely under the Mental Health Act at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where he remained for the next 45 years. He was released in 2019. Anne was unhurt. She was also, by all accounts, almost preternaturally calm throughout the incident and immediately after, cooperating with police interviews that evening with the composure of someone who had processed a genuinely extraordinary experience and placed it in its appropriate box without performing either distress or heroism. She described the experience, in later interviews, with the characteristic directness of someone who found the absurdity of extreme situations a more honest framework than drama. She did not amplify the incident for effect. She had been in an extraordinary situation, had navigated it, and that was that. What is notable, in retrospect, is where Mark Phillips was in all of this. He was in the car. He was present for the entire incident. From the moment the Ford Escort blocked their path to the moment Anne and her lady-in-waiting exited from the other side. What he did or did not do during those minutes is not part of the detailed record in the way Anne's responses are. The accounts of the kidnapping attempt focus almost entirely on Anne's courage, on Beaton's sacrifice, on the bystanders who helped, on Ball's maneuvering and Anne's counter-maneuvering. Phillips is present in the car as a historical fact. He is not present in the story as someone whose actions shaped what happened. This was, in miniature, something of a pattern that would characterize the following 18 years. After the kidnapping, Inspector Beaton, who recovered from his injuries and continued his career, was appointed to the Queen's Protection Team. The attack prompted a serious review of royal protection procedures. New protocols were established. The specific failure of having only one protection officer present that evening was addressed. The training that Beaton's successor would later describe as non-existent was replaced with something more rigorous. Anne went on doing what she always did, which was work. The marriage begins its slow drift. The Gatcombe years had for a time a genuine coherence. 2 competitive equestrians, 2,000 acres, a shared language and shared routines. They hosted an annual horse trials competition at Gatcombe from 1983, the Festival of British Eventing, which became a fixture in the British equestrian calendar. They managed the estate together. They were, on the surface of it, 2 people who understood what the other was doing because they were essentially doing the same thing. Anne threw herself into her royal duties with the relentlessness that would come to define her public career. She was not a nominal patron of charitable organizations. She was an active one, traveling extensively, engaging with the substance of the work rather than its ceremonial aspects, pressing for results, returning to the same communities and organizations over decades, rather than moving on once the photo opportunity had been exhausted. She became president of Save the Children in 1970, a role she inhabited with genuine seriousness for decades, making multiple trips to Africa and Asia and other parts of the developing world where the organization worked. She was involved with more than 300 organizations across her career as patron or president. She regularly completed more than 500 official engagements in a year. Mark, for his part, retired from the Army in March 1978 and focused full-time on his equestrian career and the management of the estate. He was still competing, still winning. He won badminton in 1981 on Lincoln, his fourth badminton title, a remarkable achievement in a competition that demands extraordinary preparation from both horse and rider. He was developing what would become a significant second career as a course designer, a technical skill that requires the ability to construct challenges that test riders without destroying horses, a craft he would later apply internationally. Their first child, Peter Mark Andrew Phillips, was born on November 15, 1977 at St. Mary's Hospital in London, the first of the Queen's grandchildren. He was also the first member of the royal family to be born at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's, establishing a tradition that would continue with subsequent generations. Anne's decision not to give Peter a royal title was a deliberate choice, made in consultation with the Queen, reflecting her view that the advantages of a commoner existence outweighed the institutional weight of a title. She later explained in an interview with Vanity Fair that she thought most people would argue there are downsides to having titles, and that she thought it was probably the right thing to do. Peter, in adulthood, agreed, saying not having a title had given him and his sister the opportunity to do things they would not otherwise have been able to. Zara Ann Elizabeth Phillips was born on May 15, 1981. The name, meaning bright as the dawn in Greek, was chosen partly to reflect the circumstances of her arrival, which was apparently rapid. She grew up as a commoner, like her brother, both of them living at Gatcombe, and gradually establishing a relationship to the equestrian world that would define their adult lives. 2 children, a working estate, a shared sporting career, official duties running through all of it. It should have been enough. In the narrow, practical sense of 2 people who had built something together and were running it adequately, perhaps it was. But adequacy is not the same as a marriage, and the evidence that began accumulating through the early 1980s suggested that the adequacy was the whole of it. The photographs are a kind of record, not dramatic evidence, not anything that proves anything by itself, but an aggregate of data points that tells a story when you line them up. By the mid-1980s, Anne and Mark were appearing in public, together with a frequency that had declined measurably from the early years. They took holidays separately. They attended events separately. Their 15th wedding anniversary arrived in November 1988 and was notable in the press, partly because the couple were in different locations for it. The royal household does not discuss marital difficulties in press statements or at press conferences. Protocols exist, statements are managed, silences are maintained, appearances are kept up. But photographs do not lie, and the space between 2 people in photographs has a quality that professional observers learn to read. The space in the photographs from the mid-1980s onward, on the occasions when Anne and Mark were photographed together, carried a quality that people who covered the family consistently noted. They were side by side, performing their roles, and not much more than that. People close to the family, speaking on background to journalists and biographers over the years, described the domestic reality in terms that were consistent with what the photographs suggested. Phillips was frequently absent, traveling for his coaching work and his competitions and his clinics. Anne was frequently absent, traveling for her engagements. When they were both at Gatcombe, they shared the land and the horses and the daily routines of an agricultural estate without sharing much else. There was, by most accounts, very little conversation between them about things that were not horses, the other woman, and the other man. The rumors began surfacing in British tabloids not long after Zara's birth in 1981. Rumors about Mark Phillips were not the specific, sourced kind that require careful legal management. They were the ambient kind that float around a prominent public figure, whose private life is not closely guarded, the kind that stick to surfaces and accumulate without necessarily proving anything individually. He was linked with Angela Rippon, the BBC television journalist and newsreader, in a manner that the tabloids reported without presenting evidence that would have survived legal scrutiny. He was linked with Pamela Boards, described in various coverage as a former Miss India, though her specific title has been contested in various accounts. He was linked with Kathy Burks, described as a Toronto public relations consultant, who sued a British newspaper for its coverage of their alleged relationship and won a libel judgment. Phillips denied everything, consistently across all cases, with the practiced ease of a man who had learned that denial was the appropriate response regardless of its relationship to the facts. None of these allegations were substantiated in ways that forced him to do anything other than deny. Then came New Zealand. In November 1984, Mark Phillips was in New Zealand running an equestrian clinic, one of several such clinics he conducted internationally as his reputation as a coach and course designer grew. He was a figure of genuine authority in the eventing world, and people paid to attend his clinics because they expected to learn things that would make them better riders. Among the people who had attended his clinic in New Zealand the previous year, in 1983, was a woman named Heather Tonkin. She was an art teacher, a horse riding enthusiast, and 32 years old. They met again in November 1984 at a party for a local Olympic rider. Phillips asked for her telephone number. The following evening, they met again. By Phillips's own implicit acknowledgement, confirmed in the subsequent legal proceedings, the relationship was not limited to that single evening. On August 10, 1985, Heather Tonkin gave birth in Auckland to a daughter she named Felicity. The existence of this child was not immediately made public. What happened in the years between 1985 and 1991 involves a degree of opacity that the full available public record does not penetrate completely. What is documented is that by 1991, when legal proceedings began in New Zealand, Tonkin's lawyers argued that Phillips had been making payments of approximately $7,500 a year through an associate, with the associated accounts describing the payments as equestrian consultancy. This arrangement, if it existed precisely as described, suggested an attempt to maintain some financial acknowledgement while publicly denying the nature of the relationship entirely. By 1989, the same year that Anne and Phillips formally separated, the informal payment arrangement was apparently breaking down. Phillips was reported to have been resistant to being named on the birth certificate. In 1991, Tonkin's lawyers began formal paternity proceedings in a New Zealand court. Phillips denied paternity when the suit was filed. A court-ordered DNA test was conducted. The results were unambiguous. Felicity Ann Tonkin, born on August 10, 1985, in Auckland, New Zealand, was Mark Phillips's biological daughter, the half-sister of Peter and Zara, the product of a relationship that had been conducted while her father was married to the Queen's only daughter, was now a matter of scientific and legal record. Felicity grew up in New Zealand with her mother. Heather Tonkin raised her in the Whitford area, in the rural countryside south of Auckland. Felicity was educated in New Zealand, developed a love of horses that mirrored her father's world if not his presence, studied veterinary science at Massey University, and graduated with a degree in equine studies. She became a practicing equine veterinarian in New Zealand. She has lived her life at a considerable remove from the British royal family and from the press that covers it, and by all available accounts has had no meaningful relationship with Mark Phillips in the years since the paternity was confirmed. She and Zara and Peter share a biological father. They share nothing else that has been made public. Heather Tonkin, explaining the decision to pursue the legal case in an interview she eventually gave, said she was doing it for her child. The lawyers who represented her emphasized the same point. Phillips had denied everything. A court had made him provide evidence that denied nothing. The child deserved acknowledgement, whatever he had chosen to do with that acknowledgement thereafter. Anne and the bodyguard, while Phillips was navigating whatever he was navigating with Heather Tonkin in New Zealand, the marriage at Getcombe was already hollow in ways that were being noticed by people in close proximity to it. the source of the emotional support Anne was not receiving from her husband had, for a period in the early 1980s, a face and a name. Peter Cross was a member of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Command, assigned as a protection officer to Anne from around 1980. He was, by all accounts, fit, attentive, and present in the day-to-day way that a husband who spent considerable time with his horses in Gloucestershire was not. He was also at the time married. The precise nature of what developed between Anne and Cross was not confirmed publicly until 2002 in a Channel 4 documentary called The Real Princess Anne. Cross himself spoke about it for that documentary, said he could confirm the relationship was true because he was now divorced, and explained that once his superiors in the Metropolitan Police found out, he lost his position as the princess's protection officer. He and his wife divorced in 1982. He remarried in 1985, having left the police force and entered the insurance industry, recognizing the irreparable damage to his law enforcement career that the revelation had caused. The detail of how his superiors found out, and through what channels, is not part of the published record. The detail of what Anne felt about Cross's departure from her daily life is similarly absent from any record she has left. What is known is that the arrangement ended, that Cross left, and that Anne continued. Then, in 1986, Commander Timothy Lawrence arrived in the royal household, and the landscape changed. Timothy James Hamilton Lawrence was born on March 1, 1955, in London, the son of a Royal Navy commander. He attended the Sevenoaks School in Kent, read geography at the University of Durham, and joined the Royal Navy on graduating. His naval career was shaped by commitment and professionalism rather than dramatic incident. He eventually reached the rank of Vice Admiral. In 1986, he was appointed equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, a role that placed him at the center of the monarch's daily life, managing her schedule, accompanying her to engagements, handling the complex logistics of a working head of state's existence. In this capacity, he was around the royal family constantly. He met Anne 11 years his senior in this context. He was 31, she was 35. Both were people who did not seek the spotlight, who found the practical world more interesting than the ceremonial one, who had substance under the surface that the surface did not always advertise. His colleagues in the Navy and in the royal household described him in terms that formed a consistent portrait over time. Steady, dependable, genuinely warm in private, quietly devoted to the people he cared about. A source who spoke to People magazine in 1989 described the relationship with Anne in terms that captured something real. Tim, the source said, had filled a loneliness in her life and given her a shoulder to cry on when she needed someone to tell her troubles to. He understood her. He cared for her in the way her husband did not. Before the relationship became known, before the letters arrived and the theft turned it into a public matter, there were early signs that someone in his orbit had noticed something. In the spring of 1988, Anne reportedly visited Lawrence at his home on several occasions when he had shingles. She brought her children with her. A neighbor who observed the visits noted there was no attempt to conceal that any of them were there. They appeared to be having a genuinely good time. This was not a secret liaison conducted in the shadows. It was a woman bringing her children to visit someone she liked, someone who provided a warmth and ease that her domestic life at Gatcombe was not supplying. In September 1988, Anne named Lawrence as one of just 3 personal advisors to her charity's trust, formalizing his presence in her working life. Days later, the Queen made him a member of the Royal Victorian Order. By early 1989, there were letters, personal letters, written with the intimacy of someone who was genuinely potty about the recipient. According to someone who later read them, thoughts about life, philosophical observations, descriptions of fields and sunshine with streams running through them. The kind of letters that are, in their content, perhaps not particularly dramatic, but whose existence tells you everything you need to know about where the writer's emotional life had gone. The stolen letters and the end of any pretense. In April 1989, those letters were taken from Anne's personal briefcase. Who took them was never established. The police investigation that followed which Detective Chief Superintendent Roy Ram later discussed in the 2002 documentary, produced no identified perpetrator. The theft was never solved. The Sun newspaper obtained the letters. The letters were personal and intimate in their tone. The stolen property of a person who had not consented to their circulation. Publishing them directly would have exposed the paper to serious legal action. The solution the paper arrived at was to announce its possession of them, to describe them as intimate correspondence from a named individual to the Princess Royal, and to run with the essential story while technically not publishing the text. The headline was something along the lines of "Palace Thieves Steals Anne's Letters." The effect was the same as publication, minus the legal exposure. Buckingham Palace responded with a statement that was careful, specific, and deliberate in what it confirmed and what it declined to elaborate upon. The stolen letters, the statement said, were addressed to the Princess Royal by Commander Timothy Lawrence, the Queen's equerry. The palace had nothing to say about the contents of personal letters sent to Her Royal Highness by a friend which were stolen and which were the subject of a police investigation. The key work in that statement was the word friend. It was not a denial of the relationship. It was a framing of the relationship at a particular distance from the obvious interpretation, offering enough to acknowledge reality without providing the tabloids with explicit language they would have used as confirmation. The statement confirmed the letters existed. It confirmed they were personal. It confirmed the sender's identity. It left exactly one thing unspecified: the nature of the relationship between the sender and the recipient. Timothy Lawrence, asked by reporters for comment, said that of course it had been very difficult and that he was hoping life would return to normal in a couple of weeks. It would not, in the sense that nothing about the situation was going to return to the condition it had been in before April 1989. The relationship was now known. The marriage was now known to be something very different from what the palace had been presenting to the public. In August 1989, Buckingham Palace announced formally that the Princess Royal and Captain Mark Phillips had decided to separate on terms agreed between them. The statement contained a phrase that would be returned to repeatedly over the next 3 years. There were no plans for divorce proceedings. Anne said the terms of the separation were private. She would remain at Gatcombe Park with Peter and Zara. Mark would remain on the estate at Aston Farm, the neighboring property they had purchased and incorporated into the Gatcombe grounds. They would, in other words, continue to share the land and the horses and the daily infrastructure of the estate without sharing a house. They would co-parent from adjacent properties. This was, by the standards of British royal history, an unusual arrangement. And it reflected something honest about how both of them understood what they had built and what it was now worth. The land and the horses and the professional world they shared were real things. The marriage was no longer a real thing, if it had been one for some years. The 1992 dissolution and what 5 Minutes said. The hesitation about pursuing divorce was not simple timidity. It was institutional calculation. Anne was the Queen's oldest daughter and the first of her children to marry. Divorce was not a simple personal decision in the context of the British royal family's relationship with the Church of England, the press, and the public understanding of what the monarchy was for. Princess Margaret had been prevented from marrying the divorced Peter Townsend in 1953. That situation had left marks. It had defined, and in some ways diminished, the remainder of Margaret's life. The word divorce carried weight that was specifically heavier in this family than in others. The no plans for divorce proceeding statement was designed to acknowledge the separation while leaving the door open to a future in which the formal dissolution of the marriage was not required. This was a viable position for approximately 2 years. In March 1991, Heather Tonkin's lawyers filed the paternity proceedings in New Zealand. In 1991, a court-ordered DNA test confirmed that Mark Phillips was Felicity Tonkin's biological father. The result changed everything, and changed it cleanly. Sources quoted in People magazine in the period immediately after the confirmation described the mood in clear terms. The result was, one source said, all the excuse she needed to get Mark out of Gatcombe. Mark, the source continued, had it. Anne's hand had been strengthened significantly. The language was that of a negotiation in which the balance of power had shifted decisively, which was exactly what had happened. She had been managing a situation. The situation had now provided her with an exit point that required no explanation, no apology, no claim to injury. Her husband had fathered a child with someone he met at a riding clinic in New Zealand while they were married. This was confirmed by a laboratory, she filed. On April 13, 1992, Buckingham Palace announced that the Princess Royal was starting the necessary legal proceedings. On April 23, 1992, a judge in a London court heard the application for dissolution and granted it. The proceedings took under 5 minutes. The Queen, speaking at a Guildhall dinner in November 1992 to mark the 40th anniversary of her accession, described the year as an annus horribilis. It was not only Anne's divorce that earned the description. In the same 12 months, Prince Charles and Princess Diana announced their formal separation in December. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had announced their separation in March. Windsor Castle caught fire in November, causing significant damage and generating public controversy about who should pay to restore a private royal residence. The year had included, in addition to the private catastrophes, a diplomatic row, a fire, 3 marital collapses, and a photographic scandal involving the former Duchess of York. The Queen's use of the Latin phrase was not theatrical. It was accurate. The second marriage, and the life that finally fit. On December 12, 1992, 8 months after her divorce from Mark Phillips was finalized, Anne married Timothy Lawrence at Crathy Kirk, a small Church of Scotland parish church near Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. The ceremony was private, with approximately 30 guests. The Church of Scotland's rules regarding the remarriage of divorced persons were less restrictive than those of the Church of England, which prohibited its clergy from conducting such services. The practicality of marrying in Scotland, where the institutional obstacle did not exist, was characteristic of both Anne's approach to problems and of the general approach of a family that had learned to navigate constraints through geography when direct confrontation was not available. In marrying Timothy Lawrence, Anne became the first divorcee in the immediate royal family to remarry since a great-great-aunt of Prince Philip had done so several generations earlier. She was the first of the Queen's children to do so. She was also, by the evidence of the next 30-plus years, one of the members of the royal family who had made the best possible choice of second marriage. Lawrence continued and completed a distinguished naval career after the marriage. He rose to vice admiral, served as vice chief of the defense staff, and was knighted. He received various honors connected to his work and to his service to the monarch. He approached the specific challenge of being married to a working member of the royal family with the steady, unpretentious competence he brought to everything else. He did not give interviews about the interior of the marriage. He did not cultivate a public profile separate from his wife's. He was present at the equestrian events, the royal occasions, the hundreds of public engagements that defined Anne's professional life, without requiring that his presence be noted or celebrated. Timothy Lawrence made a dry joke about the marriage in 2022, reportedly remarking to someone at an event that he found it quite amusing that Anne had married first an army officer and then a naval officer. It was the kind of joke that a person makes when they are entirely secure in where they stand. The order of service, he implied, was perfectly appropriate. The contrast with what had preceded this marriage was visible to anyone who watched them together in public. Anne's body language was different. The space between two people in photographs can carry information, and what the photographs from the second marriage carried was different in quality from the photographs of the first. He was beside her, she was beside him. They were attending the same events from the same place. Princess Anne's children have said, in various ways, that Timothy Lawrence has been a good presence in their lives. Peter Phillips, who was 15 when his parents separated and 22 when his mother remarried, has spoken of his stepfather with warmth. Zara Tyndall, who was 8 when the separation was announced and 16 when Anne remarried, has described a stable family life centered on Gatcombe. The relationship between Anne and her second husband has not been, from anything available in the record, the source of drama or difficulty, or the kind of slow erosion that characterized the first marriage. This is what 30 years looks like. It looks like two people at the same horse trials. It looks like an old joke about the Army and the Navy. It looks, from the outside, like exactly what it is, a marriage. The children who grew up through all of it. Peter Phillips and Zara Phillips grew up at Gatcombe Park, knowing, from the time they were old enough to understand it, that their parents' marriage had not worked, and then, knowing that their father and mother were neighbors in a settlement that was unusual by most measures but functional by their own. They were 8 and 4, respectively, when the formal separation was announced in August 1989. They were 14 and 10 when the divorce was finalized in April 1992. They were old enough for both events to have registered, but their accounts of their childhood do not suggest that the domestic arrangement that surrounded those years was experienced as traumatic. This was not accidental. Anne managed the transition with the same direct competence she brought to everything else. She did not dramatize the separation for them. She did not perform grief or perform normality. She kept the children in the routines they knew, kept Gatcombe as their center of gravity, and maintained a co-parenting relationship with Mark that was functional, even if it was not warm, because functional was what the children needed, and functional was what she could provide. Peter attended Gordonstoun School in Scotland, the same institution his grandfather Prince Philip and his uncle Charles had attended, a school known for its emphasis on outdoor education, self-reliance, and physical challenge. He studied sports science at the University of Exeter. He built a career in sports management, working in sponsorship and commercial strategy in the motorsport and financial sectors, at various points with Jaguar Racing, the Williams Formula One team, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and a company he eventually founded himself. He approached his professional life as a person who happened to be the Queen's grandson, rather than as a royal figure, and the approach worked. He built a real career on real merits. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. His personal life had its own complexity, which perhaps reflects the particular difficulty of growing up in a family where the institution of marriage had been strained to breaking across multiple generations. He married Autumn Kelly, a Canadian management consultant, at Windsor Castle in May 2008, in a ceremony attended by the Queen and warmly received by the family. They had 2 daughters, Savannah and Isla. In 2020, as the pandemic was beginning, Peter and Autumn announced their separation, and their divorce was finalized in June 2021. He became the first of the Queen's grandchildren to divorce, continuing a pattern that none of them had any particular wish to continue. He appeared in public with a new partner, oil heiress Lindsay Wallace, at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022, and that relationship also eventually ended in 2024. He was described by the Daily Telegraph as the Queen's favorite grandson, a characterization his family did not deny. He was at his grandmother's bedside, or near it, in her final days in September 2022, and walked in her funeral procession to Westminster Abbey alongside William and Harry as the coffin moved through London. Zara was, from very early on, her parents' daughter in the most direct sporting sense. The equestrian ability ran through both Phillips and Anne at a high level. What Zara did was take both and combine them into something that exceeded either. She won the individual gold medal at the 2003 European Eventing Championship. She won the individual title at the 2005 World Equestrian Games. The same year she was voted BBC Sports Personality of the Year, matching her mother's 1971 award. She competed in the 2012 London Olympics as part of the British team and won a silver medal, while her father across the arena was coaching the American team and publicly stating that he was 110% committed to helping the Americans win a medal. But that if that was not good enough, He hoped the British and Zara would be on top. This was a peculiar sentence to have to deliver publicly, and he delivered it with the composure of a man who had spent decades navigating peculiar situations with the equestrian world as his frame of reference. His daughter competed, his team competed, they were in the same field. He designed the course they both rode. Zara married England rugby captain Mike Tindall on July 30, 2011, at Canongate Kirk in Edinburgh in a deliberately modest ceremony that took place 3 months after the far more elaborate wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. Mike Tindall approached the situation of marrying into a royal family without a royal title with a directness and humor that the family found appealing and that the public found refreshing. He later confirmed, when asked, that he would definitely decline a royal title if offered one, because the choice his mother-in-law and father-in-law had made before his wife was born was the right choice, and he could see that clearly from the outside. Zara and Mike have 3 children: Mia Grace, born in January 2014, Lena Elizabeth, born in June 2018, and Lucas Philip, born in March 2021. The middle name of their youngest son is Philip, honoring the grandfather who died in April 2021. They live at Aston Farm, the property that was Mark Phillips's residence after his divorce from Anne, now Zara's home. She is, in other words, living on the same land where her parents' marriage reached its formal conclusion, having converted it into a family life with her husband and 3 children. The horses are still there. The annual Festival of British Eventing still takes place at Gatcombe. Peter serves as its director. Mark designs the cross-country course. Zara sometimes competes. Anne attends. The family occupies the same fields across which the marriage was conducted and through which it collapsed, and they do so with a pragmatism that reflects everyone involved. Felicity and what the fog cost. There are 3 people who are Mark Phillips's children by blood. 4 if you count Stephanie, born to his second wife Sandy in 1997. There is the one he raised, the one who competed in the Olympics, the one whose wedding he attended as the father of the bride. There is Peter, who walked in the Queen's funeral procession. There is Stephanie, who grew up at Aston Farm and served as a bridesmaid at Zara's wedding. And there is Felicity Tonkin, born in Auckland in 1985, who grew up in New Zealand with her mother and who became a veterinarian, and who has had, by all available evidence, no meaningful relationship with her father at any point in her life. The difference in these outcomes is not the result of anything Felicity did or failed to do. She committed no act that would explain the difference. She was conceived in a relationship her father chose to enter and chose to deny, and the denial persisted until a court made it technically impossible, at which point the acknowledgement was legal rather than personal, and the personal never followed. She grew up in the Whitford area, a rural district south of Auckland, in the countryside that her passion for horses would eventually lead her through Massey University and into a career in equine veterinary medicine. She graduated with distinction. She has spoken rarely to the press and has not sought to leverage the circumstances of her birth into any kind of public profile. She is, in the phrase the royal family applies to its members who have managed to avoid the cameras, a private person. What she is the clearest cost of the foggy years. Not the only cost, not the most visible one, but the clearest. A child exists who has never known her father except through the legal proceedings that confirmed his paternity and the child support obligations that followed. A family of half-siblings exists that she has been connected to by DNA and disconnected from by circumstance. The 3-day eventing world that is her biological inheritance from a father she has not known is also her professional world, which gives the whole arrangement a particular quality of proximity from a distance. Mark Phillips has 4 children. He has been, by the evidence of the decades since 1992, a present father to 2 of them and an absent one to the other 2, absent categories being defined not by accident or geography or the requirements of a demanding career, but by choices he made and did not subsequently revise. This is the specific shape of what the foggy years produced. The hardest working royal and what that actually looked like. One of the persistent features of Anne's public narrative is the frequency with which she is described as the hardest working member of the royal family. This is not a casual observation made by people who like her. It is documented by the register of official engagements maintained by the palace, which is public, and corroborated by the accounts of people who worked alongside her across several decades, which are consistent in their substance, if not always in their tone. What the numbers meant in practice: more than 500 official engagements a year for most of her adult professional life, across a range of causes and organizations that extended far beyond the ceremonial. She was patron or president of more than 300 organizations at various points in her career. She was engaged with the actual work of those organizations rather than their public-facing activities, to an extent that surprised people who expected a royal patron to be primarily a fundraising figurehead. The Save the Children work, which she took on in 1970 at the age of 20, is the clearest illustration. She traveled to Africa, Asia, South America, and other parts of the developing world where the organization operated, not to attend gala dinners or ribbon cuttings, but to see the programs at work, to meet the people running them and the people they served, to understand what was working and what was not, and to push for better. She went back repeatedly to the same communities over years. She remembered things. Zara, in the 2020 documentary about Anne's 70th birthday, mentioned her mother's annoying ability to remember everything as one of the defining features of growing up with her. The observation was meant affectionately. It described a quality that was also professional. A woman who paid attention and retained what she paid attention to, at a level of specificity that made the retention useful. During the years of the deteriorating marriage, this work was both a genuine commitment and, by all evidence, the thing that gave the days their structure and their meaning, when the domestic situation was producing neither. When she was in the field, in Africa or Asia or rural England, she was not at Gatcombe navigating the odd arrangement of two people who did not want to be married to each other, but had not yet formally stopped. She was somewhere that required everything she had, and she gave it without reservation. She was also, and this is the quality that gets most consistently lost in portraits that focus on her public severity, genuinely funny, not in the manufactured warmth of someone coached to appear relatable, in the specific dry, occasionally devastating way of someone who sees things as they are and finds the gap between how things are and how they are presented genuinely amusing. When Michael Parkinson asked about the kidnapping attempt on the Mall, she described her behavior during it as scrupulously polite, and added that she had thought it silly to be too rude at that stage. The humor in this is not performed. It is the actual processing of an actual experience by someone whose frame for extreme situations is pragmatic rather than dramatic. The man had a gun, he was nervous. The appropriate response was to remain composed and manage his nervousness until a better opportunity presented itself. Her children have this quality too. Peter's observation about Zara being the kind of annoying little sister that most little sisters are. Zara's reflection that she was not sure she had been that wild and that she supposed it looked that way because of her family background. Timothy's remark about the Army followed by the Navy. These are people who have found a shared register for processing difficult things, and the register is dry, direct, and entirely disinclined to elevate its own suffering or celebrate its own resilience. Anne modeled this for them across 20 years of sharing the Gatcombe land with a man whose primary failing was not cruelty or active harm, but the quieter and more comprehensive failure of being elsewhere. The palace, the protocol, and the weight of the institution. One thing that the telling of this marriage tends to flatten is how constrained everyone in it was by forces that were not personal. Not just the personal constraints of character and choice, but the institutional constraints of living inside the British royal family's particular relationship with marriage, the church, the press, and the public understanding of what the monarchy was supposed to represent. Anne could not simply leave a marriage that wasn't working in the way a private citizen could have walked out and filed papers. She was the Queen's oldest daughter. Her brother Charles's marriage was disintegrating simultaneously in ways the press had not yet fully exposed. ways that would eventually produce the kind of public rupture that the institution found almost impossible to survive with dignity. The royal family's marriages were the property of the institution in a way that made them subjects of public policy as much as personal decision. The Church of England's position on divorce was not symbolic. It had affected Margaret directly 30 years earlier. The institution had decided, when Margaret wanted to marry Peter Townsend, that the costs to the monarchy outweighed any personal consideration. Margaret lived with that decision for the rest of her life. The Queen, who had borne the weight of the institution's needs over her own sister's happiness in 1953, was now watching 3 of her 4 children's marriages fail simultaneously. The cost of the institution's constraints was visible across generations. Anne understood the weight of all of this. She had grown up in its shadow. The decision not to file for divorce in 1989, when the separation was announced, was not born of sentiment about the marriage or reluctance to cause Mark Phillips professional embarrassment. It was a calculation about what the institution required and what the timing could sustain. The Queen had other things to manage. The year 1989 was not the year. By 1992, it was. The DNA confirmation gave her an exit point that was inarguable and clear-cut, that required no claim to injury, no private revelations, no extended public drama. Her husband had fathered a child with someone he met at a riding clinic in New Zealand. This was established by a court. She filed. The judge ruled 5 minutes. The speed of those 5 minutes was not the speed of someone who had made the decision recently. It was the speed of someone who had been prepared for some time and was acting the moment the preparation aligned with the opportunity. What the fog actually was. It is worth returning to the nickname because it is unusually precise. Prince Charles, who had watched the marriage from the position of an older brother with strong opinions about his sister's welfare, called Mark Phillips foggy, on the grounds that he was thick and wet. The construction is specific. Thick is a British colloquial term for lacking intelligence or perceptiveness. Wet is a British colloquial term for emotional weakness, for the quality of being incapable of making decisions or standing behind them, for a kind of spineless good humor that never resolves into anything definite. Together they produce fog, not aggressive, not deliberately harmful, not conducting itself with the clear lines of malice or contempt, simply present in a way that obscures and impedes without intending to do either. You cannot accuse fog of anything specific. It is just there, making it harder to see. The marriage was fog. It was not characterized by the visible drama of the Charles and Diana situation, by the public fighting and the competing narratives and the authorized biographies and the television confessions. It was characterized by absence. Mark was not there emotionally when he was there physically. He was not there physically when he was abroad. He was not there in the way that matters in a marriage, which is the way of investment and attention, and the daily practice of choosing to show up for another person. The affairs or the alleged affairs or the confirmed affair in New Zealand were not the disease. They were the symptom. The disease was the absence. A man who is fully present in his marriage does not spend time cultivating relationships outside it. The presence or absence of physical infidelity is in some ways beside the point. What Heather Tonkin confirmed by producing a child and demanding a DNA test was something that the Gatcombe photographs and the separate holidays and the 15-year anniversary, taken in different places, had been saying for years. Anne knew most of it while it was happening. The accounts that survived from people who were close to her during those years suggest a woman who was clear-eyed about her situation, who had calculated what could be managed and what could not, and who was waiting for a clean exit. The patience this required was extraordinary. The composure it required was extraordinary. She continued the charitable work, the official engagements, the hundreds of annual appearances in the name of the institution and the causes she served. While living inside a domestic situation, that was something very different from what those appearances implied. This is the thing about Anne that most portraits miss. They describe the competence and the directness and the dry humor. They describe the horses and the work ethic and the refusal to perform warmth for a camera. What they often miss is the private cost of sustaining all of that through 18 years of marriage to a man who was, in the precise language of his brother-in-law, thick and wet. The world after the divorce and the world after the Queen. The 30-odd years since the divorce have arranged themselves around the framework Anne and Mark established in 1992, which is the framework of two people who share children and a professional world, and will occasionally occupy the same fields, managed with the pragmatism both were always better at than emotional performance. Mark went on to his second marriage with Sandy Pfluger in 1997. Their daughter Stephanie grew up at Aston Farm on the Gatcombe estate, became a keen equestrian and rider in her own right, graduated from Worcester University in business management, and served as a bridesmaid at Zara's wedding. His second marriage ended in separation in 2012, with his solicitors confirming the news in the same year that Phillips became involved with American show jumper Lauren Huff, who was 28 years his junior, and who had been part of the American team he had coached at the Olympics. He has been, across these various relationships, a consistent presence in the equestrian world and a less consistent presence in the lives of the people his choices affected. He designed the cross-country course for the Festival of British Eventing at Gatcombe. He attended the Queen's committal service at St. George's Chapel in September 2022. He was present at Zara's wedding. He is a neighbor, an ex-husband, a grandfather, and a figure in the sport that defined him. Anne has carried the charitable work, the official engagements, the public role through the 30 years since the divorce with the same relentlessness she brought to the preceding period. She became Princess Royal in 1987, a title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, held for life. She continued serving as president of Save the Children, as patron of hundreds of organizations, as one of the most traveled and active working royals in the family's modern history. She received the Order of the Thistle in 2000 to mark her 50th birthday, in recognition of her charitable work. She was named a Lady of the Order of the Garter in 1994. When Queen Elizabeth died at Balmoral on September 8, 2022, Anne was with her. She was the only one of the Queen's 4 children present for the death, having been at Balmoral with her mother in the final days. She accompanied the coffin on its journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh, visible to the thousands of people who lined the roads of Scotland, a figure of composed and total presence in the way she had always been. The image of her riding in the hearse for part of the route, or accompanying it at other stages, was one that the press widely identified as characteristic of her. There for the practical work, there for the difficult moment, not requiring a camera to witness it, but not hiding from one either. At the funeral service at Westminster Abbey on September 19, Peter walked in the procession alongside William and Harry. Zara attended. Timothy stood with the family. Mark was at the committal service. The full complexity of the household assembled for the fair elf woman of the who had been queen of it. And they navigated that assembly with the practiced composure of a family that had long since decided pragmatism was the appropriate response to everything the institution asked of them. The last thing worth saying, there is a quality to the way the people in this story tell their own stories that reveals more than they perhaps intend. Zara Tyndall, asked about growing up at Gatcombe Park, said she did not remember a summer without the horse trials. Peter Phillips, asked about managing the Festival of British Eventing on the land where he grew up, said they had pretty much done every job on the list under the sun for the festival. He called it a major part of their lives. He called it fortunate. Neither of them said it was strange. Neither of them said it was complicated, though it obviously was complicated, in the way that everything about growing up in the aftermath of a marriage that had not worked, on land shared with the ex-husband, in proximity to the man who had designed the cross-country courses and the woman who had survived the marriage, is complicated. They described it as a life, and a good one, and they did not appear to be performing the description. Anne modeled this for them. Whatever the foggy years cost her in private, what she provided in public, which was also what she provided to her children, was the quality of continuing, of showing up, of doing the work, of being present in the places and situations that required presence, without requiring that her own suffering be acknowledged before she agreed to proceed. She said something in the interview with Michael Parkinson about the kidnapping that captures the quality I mean. She said she had been scrupulously polite. She said she thought it was silly to be too rude at that stage, while a man with a revolver was telling her to get out of her car. The gentleness of the qualifier is the point. She was not rude because she was afraid, or because she did not understand the stakes. She was not rude because she had assessed the situation and determined that it was not the appropriate response to the specific conditions she was operating in. When the appropriate response changed, the appropriate response would change. This is at its core how she managed the marriage. She was present for it. She was patient through it. She was not rude, or at least not publicly rude, for as long as public rudeness served no useful purpose. When the DNA test result from New Zealand changed the conditions she was operating in, she acted. 5 minutes. The 500 million people who watched the wedding in 1973 watched a princess in a Tudor-style gown walking toward a man who was good on a horse. They could not see what was behind the ceremony or what was going to follow from it. They could not see the fog. What they left behind, between them involuntarily, was the woman who came through it, who raised 2 children who became people worth knowing, who spent 30 years in a second marriage to someone who had filled a loneliness in her life, and who is still there, who completed more official engagements in a year than most members of the family completed in several years across several decades, in the service of causes she actually cared about, who was with her mother when she died. The photographs from the last years of the Queen's life show the 2 of them together at various occasions, the Queen and her only daughter, both of them wearing the particular expression of women who have been doing difficult and necessary things for a long time without requiring that anyone make a fuss about it. There is a familiarity in those photographs that goes beyond ceremony. They understood each other, these 2 women. They had both managed institutions and marriages and public lives, and the specific loneliness of being required to perform serenity for millions of people while living inside conditions that were something very different from serenity. Anne understood all of it. She had always understood it. The fog is long gone. The clarity it obscured is what remains. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. A note on what The Crown got wrong and right. Netflix's The Crown, which reached 1770s and 1980s period of this story in its 4th and 5th seasons, gave Anne and Mark Phillips considerable screen time and took several liberties that are worth examining because the distortions tell us something about how the story has been understood. The show depicted an affair between Anne and Peter Cross with a depth and centrality that went beyond what the available evidence supports. Cross himself confirmed in the 2002 documentary that the relationship was true, but the show's dramatization of it as a fully realized romantic attachment, complete with emotional scenes and explicit discussions of the marriage's failures, was built on the bones of a confirmed fact and filled out with speculation and invention that the confirmed fact does not actually support. More significantly, the show gave Phillips a quality of sympathetic bewilderment, a decent man overwhelmed by the institutional demands of a royal marriage, that the actual record does not quite justify. The Crown's Phillips was kind of sad. He wanted things to be different. He was trying, in his limited way, to connect with a woman who was fundamentally out of reach because of what she was. The show made the marriage failures seem equally distributed. The available evidence suggests a different distribution. Phillips was not bewildered. He was absent. The 2 things look similar from a distance, but they are very different on close examination. Bewilderment is an active condition, a state of genuine effort that fails because the task is too hard. Absence is the decision not to be where you need to be. Phillips's absence from the marriage was documented in photographs, in testimony from people who were around them, in the separate holidays and the separate engagements, and the children, who were raised primarily by their mother, because their father was not consistently there. The New Zealand situation is not the behavior of a bewildered man. It is the behavior of a man who made a series of choices over several years and then spent several more years denying them until a court made denial impossible. There's no generous interpretation of a man who allegedly paid the mother of his illegitimate child $7,500 a year through a business account described as equestrian consultancy, and then resisted being named on the birth certificate when the payments stopped, and then denied paternity in legal proceedings, and was then confirmed by DNA testing to be the father beyond any scientific doubt. The crown made him sad, the record made him foggy. This is a meaningful distinction, not because it relieves Anne of any complicated emotions or choices she made during those years, but because accuracy matters when the story being told is not historical fiction, but a public reckoning with a real marriage between real people, one of whom is still alive. The equestrian world as the frame for everything. One of the things that is genuinely strange about the entire arc of this story is the consistency of the world that everyone in it inhabits. The equestrian world, specifically three-day eventing, is the frame through which almost every significant relationship and event in the story passes. Anne and Mark met at a European eventing championship. They were brought together by horses. They were kept in proximity after the divorce by horses. The Festival of British Eventing at Gatcombe, which takes place annually on land that was given as a wedding present and is now divided between the ex-wife who retained the main estate and the daughter who lives at the neighboring farm, is organized by the ex-wife's son, designed by the ex-husband, and sometimes competed in by the ex-wife's daughter. Felicity Tonkin became a veterinarian specializing in equine medicine. The horse that Phillips was riding, when his horse pulled a muscle at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, prevented him from competing individually, but the team still won a silver medal. The horse is a recurring presence, almost a character, throughout a story that is ostensibly about human beings and their relationships with each other. There is something in this that reflects a genuine truth about the people involved. The horse is what they understand. The horse is where they make sense to themselves and to each other. In the stable and on the cross-country course, and at the dressage arena, the language is shared and the skill is visible, and the relationship between effort and result is legible. It is in the non-equestrian parts of life, the domestic parts, the emotional parts, the relational parts that require same consistent investment in another person that a rider gives to a horse, that the story's complications appear. Mark Phillips was good at horses. He was not as good at people. Anne was good at both, but the specific people skill she was best at was the professional kind, the skill of engaging with strangers and officials and aid workers and community leaders, of being present and useful in contexts that required presence and usefulness. The domestic kind of people's skill, the skill of building and sustaining an intimate relationship over decades with a partner who is going to be present every day and needs to be genuinely known, was a different challenge, and the years with Phillips were not the years in which she had optimal conditions for practicing it. Timothy Lawrence was the outcome of her having waited long enough to find someone who was actually there. The press, the palace, and the management of narrative. The British tabloid press in the 1980s was not the press of the previous decade, and was becoming, year by year, more aggressive in its coverage of the royal family and less susceptible to the palace's traditional tools of managing that coverage. The relationship between the press and the palace had been relatively managed through the 1960s and into the 1970s, characterized by a combination of deference and access that kept some things private in exchange for cooperation on others. By the early 1980s, the Diana effect was changing the tabloid landscape. The Princess of Wales was the most photographed woman in the world and the most commercially valuable subject the British press had encountered in generations. The techniques developed to cover Diana, the long lens photography, the source cultivations inside and outside the palace, The willingness to publish things that earlier generations of editors would have considered private spread to the broader coverage of the royal family. This meant that the deterioration of Anne and Mark's marriage was being covered with a thoroughness and a lack of inhibition that would not have been applied to it a decade earlier. The rumors about Phillips's extramarital interests circulated through the tabloids throughout the 1980s. Each individual story could be denied and was, but the aggregate had a weight that individual denials could not fully neutralize. When the letters were stolen in April 1989, the story had all the elements the tabloids needed. The confirmed presence of a man who was not her husband, the physical evidence of intimate correspondence, the confirmation from the palace that the letters existed and were personal. The Sun's decision to announce possession of the letters rather than publish them was legally prudent and journalistically effective. The palace's statement acknowledging the letters' existence and confirming their sender was a kind of damage limitation. By confirming the less damaging interpretation proactively, the palace denied the press the ability to fill in the blank with something worse. The damage was done anyway, in the sense that the relationship was now known. Anne and Lawrence were confirmed as having an intimate correspondence. This was happening within a marriage that had been visibly in trouble for years. The calculation at the palace was apparently that acknowledging the minimum was preferable to the appearance of stonewalling. What is notable is how differently the two events, the affair with Cross and the correspondence with Lawrence, were handled publicly. Cross's existence was not confirmed by any palace statement while it was happening. It was confirmed by Cross himself in a documentary more than a decade later. The stolen letters were confirmed by the palace within days of the theft, in a statement that was clearly designed to get in front of the story. The different approach may reflect different calculations about which story was more manageable. Cross was a police officer, and the relationship, whatever its precise nature, involved a member of the security services. Lawrence was the Queen's equerry, and the correspondence, whatever its precise content, involved a senior member of the household. The second story had to be managed immediately because it was going to break immediately, regardless of what the palace did. The first had been contained long enough that by the time it was confirmed, it was historical rather than current. Zara's tongue stud and the family's relationship with convention. In 1998, Zara Phillips was photographed with a tongue stud. She was 17 years old. She was also the Queen's granddaughter, the daughter of the Princess Royal, and attending a school in Cheltenham. The tongue stud made headlines out of proportion to its actual significance, because what it represented was a member of the royal family doing something conspicuously not royal, in a way that was visible and deliberate. Her father apparently referred to her in this period as the family wild child. Zara herself, asked about the characterization years later, said she was not sure she had been that wild, and supposed it looked that way because of her family background. The royal background the comparison was being made to was one of measured public behavior and managed private deviation. The family had a long tradition of doing things that were not consistent with the public image while maintaining the public image carefully. Margaret's relationship with Townsend, Charles's relationship with Camilla, the various marital difficulties of multiple family members, all of these had been managed through the apparatus of palace protocol and tabloid management. Zara's tongue stud was notable precisely because it was undeniable. You cannot manage a tongue stud as a misunderstanding or a misquotation. It is there and it is visible, and the photographer gets the shot, and the headline writes itself. It was in its way a small act of honesty in a family whose relationship with honesty was complicated. What is interesting is that Zara's subsequent life suggests a person who found her own version of that honesty in a sustained and productive way. She competed, she won, she married someone she actually wanted to marry. She declined the titles that would have made her public life more complex. She lives on the farm next to her mother's estate and raises her children among horses and friends and family, and does not appear to have constructed a public persona that is meaningfully different from the private one. This is not nothing. The Windsors produce people who learn, very young, to maintain a gap between the performed self and the actual self. Zara Phillips Tyndall appears not to have that gap, or to have a much smaller one than the institution typically produces. Whether this reflects her parents' decision not to give her a royal title, Anne's particular approach to raising her, the influence of a rugby-playing husband who has strong opinions about authenticity, or simply her own temperament is impossible to fully determine. What it reflects, almost certainly, is the specific quality of the upbringing that Anne managed under the conditions of the dissolving marriage. She kept her daughter's feet on actual ground. She gave her real work to do, in a real sport with real consequences if she did it badly. She protected her from the worst of the tabloid attention in the years when Peter and Zara were young enough to be most vulnerable to it. She modeled competence and composure in the face of difficulty, without requiring her children to understand the full extent of the difficulty. This is what the work of the foggy years actually produced, in the generation that came after. What Princess Anne is now, Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise Princess Royal, is in her mid-70s. She is the second child and only daughter of a monarch who is now as a generation gone. She is the wife of a man who has been with her for more than 30 years and who makes dry jokes about the army and the navy. She is the mother of a son who has been through a divorce and a daughter who won the World Equestrian Games. She is the grandmother of 5 children whose primary connection to the equestrian tradition of the family is already evident in their early years. She was described in a 2020 documentary made to mark her 70th birthday as a quietly bold royal. She was described as having a love of horses, hard work, and a mischievous sense of humor. The documentary had exclusive access. Her children sat on camera and talked about her. Her son said she had an annoying ability to remember everything. Her daughter talked about trying to leave the grandchildren with her on Sundays. She has never written a memoir. She has never given an author's biography. She has never appeared on a television program to explain the interior of her first marriage, or how she processed the kidnapping attempt, or what it was like to be the daughter who stayed loyal to an institution that she was never going to benefit from in the way her brothers did, because the monarchy passed through men, and she was a woman. She did not complain about any of these things publicly. She did not construct a narrative of herself as someone who had been treated unfairly and was owed acknowledgement. She showed up instead, year after year, engagement after engagement, country after country, cause after cause. There are people in the public record who have described her in terms that accumulate into something useful. A royal protection officer called her a gem. A source close to Timothy Lawrence said he had filled a loneliness in her life. Mark Phillips, years after the divorce, said the one thing they had done well was how they handled Peter and Zara. Zara said she was grateful her mother had not given her a title. Peter said his grandmother had been an inspirational person throughout his life, and that she had been an inspirational person to him, specifically because she showed up. Mike Tyndall said, more or less, that he could see why the title decision was the right one, because he was watching its effects from the outside. What all of these observations have in common is that they are about presence. The quality of actually being there in the specific ways that matter, across the specific moments when maternity or usefulness or loyalty or simple company is what the situation requires. She was present with her mother when her mother died. She accompanied the coffin. She rode in the hearse or beside it for parts of the journey. She was there. This is the woman who walked through Westminster Abbey in a Tudor-style gown in November 1973 and spent the next 18 years finding out what she had walked toward, and then spent the 30 years after that building something that was genuinely hers. The 500 million people who watched the wedding could not have seen any of this. The fog was still to come. The exit was decades away. The second marriage, the real one, was 20 years away. All they could see was the princess in the beautiful gown, walking toward the man who was good on a horse. What they could not see was that she was going to be fine. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. The marriage of Anne's siblings and the year the institution buckled. To fully understand what 1992 meant for Anne, it helps to understand the broader context of what was happening to the royal family in the same months. The dissolution of Anne's marriage was one of 3 simultaneous marital failures in the Queen's immediate family, and the 3 together produced a crisis of public confidence in the institution that the Queen acknowledged when she called the year an annus horribilis. Prince Charles and Diana had been separately living largely parallel lives since the late 1980s. The public did not fully know this. The press suspected it and had been reporting around the edges of it. Inside the palace, the management of the Charles and Diana situation had become significant institutional preoccupation, one that consumed considerable energy and produced considerable anxiety at every level of the household. The marriage failure was going to be public, was going to be enormous, and was going to produce a reckoning with the institution's relationship with truth that nobody in the palace was entirely prepared for. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had announced their separation in March 1992, the same month that the paternity of Felicity Tonkin was confirmed. Andrew and Sarah had a more conventionally chaotic marriage, characterized by reported infidelities on both sides, geographical separation produced by Andrew's naval career, and a clash of temperaments between a woman who was so sociable and expansive and needed a certain kind of attention to function well, and an institution that was neither sociable nor expansive, and regarded the kind of attention Sarah sought as a problem to be managed. Their separation was announced first, before the Waleses, and was in some ways the announcement that opened the door to the others. Once one of the Queen's children was publicly separated, the next step was less shocking than it would have been before. The domino logic was awful. Andrew in March, Anne in April with the divorce finalized, Charles and Diana in December. Windsor Castle caught fire in November 1992 in a blaze that started in Queen Victoria's private chapel and spread through several of the historic state apartments before being brought under control. The fire destroyed or seriously damaged more than 100 rooms and caused structural damage to a significant portion of the castle's north and east wings. The public debate about who should pay for the restoration, the taxpayer or the royal family, added a financial and political dimension to a year that was already producing more institutional damage than anyone had expected. The Queen spoke at the Guildhall in November, in the middle of all of this, and said the words that defined the year. She said 1992 was not a year on which she would look back with undiluted pleasure. She mentioned that one of her more sympathetic correspondents had described it as an annus horribilis. She acknowledged the criticism the family had received. She acknowledged it with a measure of dignity that the situation required, and that the year had not always produced. Anne watched all of this. She was part of it, in the sense that her own divorce was one of the 3 that composed the catastrophe. She also watched from a specific vantage point that was different from her siblings. She had the clearest exit. Her divorce had the clearest factual basis. Her subsequent remarriage was the most straightforward of the possible outcomes. She had Timothy. Charles had Camilla, who was still married to Andrew Parker Bowles until 1995, which made the situation considerably more complicated. Andrew had Sarah, and the 2 of them would arrange one of the stranger postmarital cohabitations in the royal family's history by continuing to share Royal Lodge in Windsor for decades after their divorce, in an arrangement that mystified and amused observers in roughly equal measure. Anne's postmarital arrangement, by comparison, was organized and functional. Her ex-husband lived next door. Their children were raised primarily by her. The estate was managed. The horses were still there. The festival of British eventing continued. She married Timothy in December. She moved on. The management of memory. One of the things most striking about Anne is what she does not say. She does not say things about her first marriage. She has not given interviews reconstructing its failure, allocating blame, offering her version of the intimate histories that the tabloids and the biographers have tried to assemble from outside. She has not written about it. She has not permitted authorized biographies that would produce an inside account of it. What she has said across decades of public life tends to be about the work, about the organizations she supports, about the trips she has taken, about the issues she has engaged with, about the things she has learned in 30 years of Save the Children travel and policy engagement. She talks about horses. She talks about her children. She makes dry observations about the Crown's portrayal of her, noting that the show required Erin Doherty to spend 2 hours on her hair for a single scene, while Anne herself takes about 10 to 15 minutes. The decision not to narrate the marriage publicly is entirely consistent with how she has managed everything else. The palace does not discuss private matters. Anne does not discuss private matters. The distinction between the two is that the palace manages silence as institutional policy, while Anne manages it as personal preference. She is not silent because she has been told to be silent. She is silent because she has decided that this is her life, and she will not make it a performance. This is a genuine form of dignity, and it is rarer than it sounds. The 21st century has produced an extraordinary proliferation of public self-narration among public figures, especially as members of families with contested histories. The appetite for the inside account, the real story, the personal truth as distinguished from the official truth, is enormous and is fed by people who have decided their private experiences are public property when managed correctly. Anne has never fed it, not once. Not about the kidnapping, not about the marriage, not about the divorce, not about the children, not about the second marriage. She answers questions at royal engagements about the work she is there to do, and she does not answer other questions with any particular grace or willingness. This has not made her unpopular, quite the opposite. She is consistently among the most admired members of the royal family in British polling, a fact that has never been accurately explained by any single observation about her public manner, or her charitable work, or her equestrian career, but which seems to reflect, in aggregate, the sense that she is the real thing. That the person visible at the public engagements is the person who exists when the cameras are gone. That the composure is not performed but actual, and that this makes it worth more than the performed kind. The public has an instinct for this distinction that is quite reliable. They often cannot articulate it, but they can sense it. Anne has given them something to sense for 70+ years, and what they sense is consistent. The specific skill of continuing. There is a word that comes up repeatedly in accounts of Anne's life, across the different people who have described her, in different contexts, over different periods. The word is present. She was present for the kidnapping and managed it. She was present for the years of the marriage and managed them. She was present for the separation and managed it. She was present for the divorce and managed it. She was present for the remarriage and has managed it for 30 years. She was present for the deaths, her father in April 2021, her mother in September 2022. She was with her mother when she died. Being present is not a passive quality, though it can sound like one. In the context of a life as crowded with public obligation as Anne's, being present means making a choice continuously to bring your actual self to the actual situation, rather than sending a version of yourself that has been groomed for public palatability. It means the 500 engagements a year are not processed as obligations, but as genuine opportunities to be useful. It means the co-parenting with an ex-husband who fathered a child in New Zealand is managed with the same functional competence as an agricultural estate, not because the emotional reality of it is absent, but because the emotional reality of it is not everyone's business. Being present in the way Anne has been present requires something that most people underestimate when they observe it from the outside: the capacity to hold very different kinds of reality simultaneously, without collapsing the private into the public or the public into the private. She has been doing this since she was 23. The wedding was the beginning of the practice, not the occasion that required it. The practice is still ongoing. She is in her mid-70s. She is still completing hundreds of official engagements each year, though fewer than the 500+ of her peak years. She is still at the horse trials. She is still at Gatcombe. She is still married to Timothy Lawrence, who is still making dry jokes about the order of service. The fog ended in April 1992, when a judge took under 5 minutes to dissolve 18 years of marriage. What came after is not a story of triumph or recovery in the dramatic sense. It is a story of continuation, of a woman who had always been present and continued to be present, in the specific ways the situation required, year after year. The cameras recorded the wedding. They did not record most of what came after. They were not there for the quiet years, the Gatcombe mornings, the separate holidays, the photographs with the space in them. They were not there for the letter theft, or the aftermath of the DNA test, or the 5 minutes in April. What the cameras were there for, 30 years later, was a woman riding alongside her mother's coffin on a country road in Scotland, because her mother had died, and there was something to be done, and she was going to do it. 500 million people had watched the beginning. Considerably fewer were watching by the time it became fully clear what kind of person she was. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. Peter and Zara in full and what they chose. The two children who came through the Gatcombe years and emerged on the other side as adults have made choices that, taken together, form a coherent response to the specific circumstances of their upbringing. Peter Phillips was born into a world that was already paying attention to him before he was old enough to do anything worth attending to. He was the first grandchild of the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, born at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington, a birth that was reported on the front pages of newspapers across the world. His parents had already declined to give him a royal title, which meant that the press attention of the early years was not compounded by the institutional apparatus of royal designation. He grew up at Gatcombe, went to Gordonstown, went to Exeter, and built a career in sports management without reference to the royal family in any of his professional descriptions. He was, by the evidence of the people who have known him as an adult, somebody who understood very clearly what his position was and what it was not, and operated accordingly. He was Queen Elizabeth's first grandchild and was described by the Daily Telegraph in a profile as her favorite. He walked in her funeral procession alongside William and Harry, the princes of the family, the heirs, and the spare of the direct line. And he walked with them as a commoner who happened to be there because he was the grandson who loved her and had been close to her and was going to be there regardless. His marriage to Autumn Kelly ended in divorce in 2021, making him the first of the Queen's grandchildren to divorce. The family has not commented on the marriage failure in any detail. The statement announcing the separation in 2020 described the decision as amicable and noted the couple planned to share custody of their daughters. Autumn Kelly and Peter Phillips have managed the post-marriage co-parenting with a discretion and functionality that reflects, perhaps, the example they had in front of them for most of Peter's childhood. He began a relationship with Lindsay Wallace, described as an oil heiress, in 2022, and that relationship ended in 2024. He is, as of the time of this script, a private individual in his mid-40s, running businesses in London and managing his part of the Gatcombe estate, not a working royal, not a public figure in the formal sense. A man with royal connections and a career that stands on its own merits. Zara's life has followed a different trajectory, one defined more visibly by the equestrian achievement that was the family's most consistent inheritance. She was the European champion in 2003. She was the world champion in 2005. She was the BBC Sports Personality of the Year in 2006. She won the Olympic silver medal with the British team in 2012. She competed at the World Equestrian Games in 2018. She has been, throughout her adult career, one of the most accomplished equestrians in Britain, doing in a different era what her mother did in the 1970s and what her father did in the 1960s and 1970s, and doing it better than most of them individually. She married Mike Tyndall, the England rugby captain, in 2011. The marriage has been conspicuously stable and happy in the way the marriages it surrounded in the wider royal family have not always been. Mike has said publicly, in various interviews across the decade plus since the wedding, that he married the right person. Zara has said the same in fewer words and in the way she always says things, which is directly and without elaboration. Their 3 children have the specific fortune of growing up in a household that is connected to the royal family without being consumed by it, where the primary identity is equestrian and rural and sporting, and where the emotional temperature is warm in the way that households built on genuine affection rather than managed performance tend to be warm. Zara noted in a 2015 interview that she was very lucky her parents had not given her a title. She said she and Peter had grown up able to do all the things that gave them opportunities. Mike Tyndall said, more recently, that he would definitely turn down a title if offered one. These are consistent responses from people who have watched the effects of the title decision from multiple angles over 4 decades and continue to believe it was right. What both of them carry, from the years in which their parents' marriage was deteriorating and the years after the divorce, is the specific quality of having been raised by a mother who did not require them to manage her unhappiness and did not make her children her confidence in the marriage failure. She did not load her private reality onto her public children. She managed the foggy years herself and gave them what she could give them, which was a stable physical home, a shared passion for horses, an example of work done with genuine care, and the specific gift of not being required to understand things they were too young to understand. The gift was not nothing. The families of divorce can be sorted roughly into those in which the children become the vessel for the parental grief, and those in which the parental grief is processed elsewhere, and the children are released from that burden. Anne put the grief, to the extent that she experienced grief, somewhere that was not her children. The children grew up largely intact. This is not the most dramatic story available in this family. It is not the kidnapping attempt, or the DNA test, or the stolen letters, but it is in its quiet way the most important one. The most lasting consequence of 18 years of marriage to Mark Phillips was not the divorce. The lasting consequence was 2 children who became people with genuine lives and genuine choices. People who can say with credible specificity that their mother protected them and who are grateful for it, the specific quality of the second marriage. It is not possible to write about the foggy years without writing about what came after them, because what came after them is the clearest measure of what the years themselves had cost and what they had produced. Timothy Lawrence has been Anne's husband for more than 30 years. He served in the Royal Navy and reached Vice Admiral. He was knighted, becoming Sir Timothy Lawrence, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence. He has been present at the family events, the royal occasions, the horse trials at Gatcombe, the Olympic stands, the funerals. He has said almost nothing about any of it in public, which is appropriate and consistent, and exactly what the person who wrote intimate letters to a married princess should probably do. In the years after those letters were confirmed to exist by a palace statement. What the photographs show in 30 years of photographs is a man who is where he is supposed to be, not performing his presence, not managing the distance between himself and the institution his wife inhabits, but there, in the stand watching, at the church standing, at the family gathering being part of the family. The dry joke about the Army and the Navy, which he made in 2022 and which was reported in various outlets as evidence of a warmth and humor in the marriage, is the kind of joke that a person makes when they are not anxious about their position. You do not make that joke if you are insecure about what you married into. You make it if the marriage has been, for 3 decades, genuinely good, and you have enough perspective on the whole arc of it to find the Army then Navy sequence amusing. Anne has not made public statements about the second marriage, in the way that people in difficult marriages sometimes make public statements about their second marriages, the kind that signal relief and contrast and gratitude for having found something better. She does not need to. The photographs are consistent. The 3 decades are consistent. The children and grandchildren who have spoken about the family are consistent. It is the second marriage, not the first, that produced the grandmother who is annoying in her ability to remember everything. The grandmother Zara and Peter try to leave the grandchildren with on Sundays. The first marriage produced the mother. The second marriage produced the grandmother, which is to say the version of Anne who has the time and the emotional space. and the domestic stability to be fully present in the way that the Gatcombe years, for all her practical management of them, did not always permit. This is what the foggy years ultimately produced, through the specific logic of having to get through them before arriving at the other side. Not a tragic story and not a triumphant one, but a true one. The last public moments and what they meant. In the autumn of 2022, Queen Elizabeth died at Balmoral at the age of 96. The death was sudden in the sense that she had been at Balmoral and had appeared at public engagements a few days before, though the family had apparently gathered because the medical situation had become serious. Charles and Camilla flew to Scotland immediately upon being told the situation was critical. William, Harry, and other family members followed. Anne had been at Balmoral. She was already there when her mother died. She accompanied the coffin on its journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh, traveling with it as it moved through the Scottish countryside that the family had always loved. The landscape that had been their private world across 7 decades of summers and Christmases and retreats from public life. The roads were lined with people who had come to watch the procession pass, who stood in silence or grief or simple witnessing as the hearse moved through villages and hillsides. They had never expected to be part of a royal procession. Anne rode in or alongside the hearse for parts of the journey. She was visible to the people who lined the routes. She was doing what she had always done, which was being present for the difficult work when the difficult work needed to be done. Later in London, at the lying-in state at Westminster Hall, the family members kept vigil beside the coffin in a rotation that was organized by palace protocol and observed by thousands of people who queued for hours for the opportunity to pass through the hall. Anne stood her vigil. She did not require the moment to be about her. She was there. At the funeral service at Westminster Abbey, the congregation included heads of state, foreign royals, dignitaries, and the family. Peter Phillips walked in the procession. Zara was present. Timothy Lawrence stood with the family. Mark Phillips attended the committal service at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. The family assembled in the full complexity of what it was. The monarch's children and their various partners, the grandchildren, the ex-husband of the daughter, who had been married to him for 18 years. The institution's protocol encompasses these complications without appearing to notice them. The ex-husband attended the committal service in the chapel. He stood in the appropriate place. He was not assigned a prominent role and did not seek one. He was there as one of the people connected to the person being buried, and the connection, however complicated by what had followed it, was real. The shape of a life and what it teaches. Stories about people in public life tend to organize themselves around a few available templates. The fall from grace, the redemption arc, the tragedy that was always coming. The woman who had it all. Anne's story does not fit any of these templates particularly well. She was not a fall from grace because she was never pretending to a grace she did not have. The kidnapping confirmed she had courage. The marriage confirmed she had patience and calculation. The work confirmed she had commitment. The second marriage confirmed she had judgment, or had eventually found the conditions in which her judgment could operate correctly. There was no redemption arc because there was nothing to redeem. She made a choice in 1973 that turned out to have been made without full information, because the full information took years to accumulate, and some of it arrived by way of a DNA test in a New Zealand courtroom. When the information was complete enough, she acted. This is not a moral failing that requires redemption. It is the experience of most human beings who have been in a long relationship and come to understand what they were actually in. The tragedy template does not apply because she did not collapse under the weight of the foggy years. She continued. She worked. She produced from that period 2 children who are intact human beings. She arrived at the other side still standing, still present, still doing the 500 engagements a year in service of causes she actually cared about. And the woman who had it all template does not apply because that template requires the person to believe, at the beginning, that they have it all, and then to learn otherwise. Anne does not appear to have believed she had it all. She appears to have understood, from a fairly early point in the marriage, what the situation was and what it was going to require. What the story teaches, if it teaches anything, is something more modest and more durable than any of those templates accommodate. It teaches what it means to be present across a long time, in conditions that are not always the conditions you would choose, doing the work that is in front of you with the attention it requires, and trusting that the long accumulation of presence is its own form of meaning. This is not a lesson the 500 million people watching in 1973 were watching for. They were watching for the gown and the abbey and the princess and the prince. They got all of that. What they also got, though they could not see it yet, was the beginning of a life that was going to be more complicated and more costly and more quietly extraordinary than the ceremony promised. The fog came, the fog lifted, the woman who walked through it is still walking. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.